Hey, what's going on, Maschine Masters? My name is MGTheFuture. Thank you for joining us on the channel today. Today I will be working in Studio One version 4, and I want to show you guys a couple of cool things that I've stumbled across while using the chord track. Chord track I've done in a couple of old videos, especially for bass. In this particular track, I started with drums, which I rarely do, and then I started with an 808, which is probably the first or second time in my life I've ever done that, because for me, using bass usually means following chords or some type of root structure. But since we have these particular tools, I don't have to do that anymore. And in such, I can focus more on the rhythm instead of, the notes. So here's just a C bass going along with a drum pattern, trap style. So in that context, at the very end there, I went up a fifth from the C. And that's real simple stuff. Now what I want to do is transform that and add instruments and things like that. And this is probably the biggest thing that most people get stuck on, because if we hear in more modern music, people are starting to sample a little bit, 1 or 2 bars at a time, guitars, and keys especially. Or if you want to compose from scratch and use some of your favorite VSTs, the question usually becomes, well, what chords do you play? Or what melody do you play in what key and what scale and things like that. And the chord track has a lot of cool tools to help you out with. So the first thing I want to show you how to do is just deal with chords. So what I'm going to do is record one chord, and it could be for you whatever chord you want. I'm going to do a C minor chord. You could do a C major chord, but just record one. So that one chord, I can now take and duplicate it and put it wherever I want in this particular track. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. But the first thing I want to do is right click on it, go down to instrument parts, and do extract to chord track. So that C minor chord I put in the chord track, and put a C minor as well. So I'm duplicate it and maybe put it somewhere else, maybe on beat with the 808. So right there where that 808 kicks in. Because each time I place these, that's how many times you're actually going to hear the chord, regardless of what the chord is. Real simple, real basic. And it works well so far with the bass because it's a C bass and a C minor chord. Now what I want to do is take all of these, right click them all, and send them all to the chord track. And what you do is when you have multiple chords like this, make sure you cover the whole range. If they're different chords, it's trickier because you want these to overlap properly each time you do a different chord. So we got that. And now what I can do is double click on this and bring up this circle of fifths chart. And what's interesting about the circle of fifths chart is that it shows you the movement of any chord, any key, wherever you want to go to in this particular track. You can just follow the circle. And just as a general rule of thumb, whatever key you're starting with, the chord you're starting with, so in my case it was C minor, you would use the 6 pie slices that touch it. So for you to see this easier, if it was A minor, the 6 chords you could use is the ones next to it and the 3 above it. So it's like a pie slice of 6 chords. So here I go from C to G, F, whatever. Or I don't have to be on C at all. I might be over here instead, G flat minor. And then my next chord could be B minor because it's right next to it. Then now my next chord could be D flat minor. And then I could circle this around and do the same thing over again. So now that I have that, I could take all these and make sure you're in that information panel, I, and tell follow chords parallel. And now you're gonna notice these chords move. I don't like this last chord. We'll change it to a major, see if it feels better. Because this one's not changing. So it doesn't like that. So I'm going to extend this chord, and then it changes. There we go. And that's a really basic level of using this particular feature. Also, you could try narrow as well, which changes the way that the chords flow. It's a little bit more smoother. And what's cool about it is if you have every track following the chord track across the top, mind you, when you duplicate this, if there's no chord track, it goes back to what it originally was. So you want to copy your chord track as well when you do this. But what'll happen is if you're in your song and you want to do a bridge or something, instead of thinking of a new bridge or key from scratch, you just modify what's already in your song. Or if you open it back up and you're working with a rapper directly and they're singing in a different key, or auto-tune sounds better in a different key, you can figure out what that key is, set that main chord, and then use the chords next to it without having to rewrite every part of your song. So I'm going to undo this. I'm going to take this, set this to off, but I'm just going to mute this track for now because that's a VST type track. There's other ways to use this. We're going to drag a sample in, and this is from the Royalty Free Loops Volume 4. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to time stretch it, holding the Alt key and dragging that rightmost border to our 2-bar snap. And remember, my 808 is still in C minor while this particular sample is going. And that actually sounds good for that sample. So I'm going to right click on this sample, audio, extract the chord track, and this whole progression or melody is one long A flat 6 chord. And you can double click on that and see what it is. It's like a 7th, but it's flatted at the end. Really cool that you can see that. So when you load up sample packs and something stands out, you're like, what is that chord? The fact that you can see it and then play it yourself is really helpful. But now that I know what that key is and it's in my chord track, now I go back to my bass track, tell it to follow bass. And that's really lit by itself. And that's how a lot of people get along with it. And since we're in this chord right here, the reason why my C minor is working, because that's one of the 6 pie slices that are with AB major scale, it looks like. C minor is one of the chords in that region. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because I want to duplicate all these. And a lot of beats, you'll notice, do like this chord change up, or on the bass only is their drop. Every 4 bars, 8 bars, the bass changes. And without you having to reprogram your whole bass, you can just do 2 different chord tracks following the same exact thing, and then use the neighboring chords around it to keep it in key. Let's do this. B flat's good too. So the neighboring chords sound this. And our bass isn't actually playing the chord, it's only playing the root note, the actual note itself, and it follows along. And everything's happy and harmonious. So that adds a whole nother level of arrangement and ideas. If you're tired of something in your track, try one of the neighboring keys or chords. I think there's a cool loop in here somewhere that would be a great example. So that's an actual chord progression. This works way better when there's a chord involved. If you're dragging your melody loops and stuff, sometimes it doesn't detect what it is. In that case, you could right click it, send it to Melodyne, find the scale, and work with it that way. But I prefer when I'm using loops and samples to find chord progressions. Now on this track, we have the chords at the bottom, these detect chords. We want to send that to the top to the chord track. And of course, we could just follow the chords with bass. But what if this is too happy? What if I don't actually like this? So, because these chords are up here and we double click on it, we're in the A flat minor pie slice or the B major pie slice, I'll click on the other chords. Yeah, it's sharing those pie slices. So the key is actually E flat minor or G flat major because the pie slice went 3 over to this way. So the middle key would be these 2 instead of this one. And then of course you can set the key at the bottom. So like a G flat major, just so you know when you add other parts. And if you do know your scales, you can play melodies and stuff. But anyway, that's not what I want to show you. What I want to show you is I actually don't like this key. So let's go to E major instead. In E major, so we want to start with G flat minor. That's a G flat minor 7. That one's going to be E. And now on the audio track, instead of my 808, once you got these new keys set up, you do follow chords on the audio. And you get 2 more options here, scale and universal. That one's interesting to me because I'm not sure what those 2 do yet, but I have been experimenting with them. So I want to try, and then choose your tune mode since this is audio. We're going to do piano since it's keys. And there's a little bend at the end there. So I'm going to remove it back so that bend doesn't happen. But that beat didn't sound right. Let's try. Wow, it changed the actual audio. So when you're buying these loop packs and these splice kits and everything in that nature, you don't have to worry about everyone using the same thing you have because you can take the texture and the sounds and the chords and make them your own progression. The last thing is, if you do play your own chords, let's say like these guys, I can go to its track and tell it to follow parallel or follow narrow with my sample as well. So now I can mute that track and just use its chord progression too. which is very powerful. And then I can follow it in different ways. So this is really, really powerful set of tools. And I believe the other algorithms that we see on the audio and stuff will affect different types of parts. Like if you had a solo of a bass line, like a lot of these kits have the 808's or whatever. So this is a bass line. We got to time stretch it. We got to mute our bass. I'm going to tell it to detect its key. I'm not going to send it to the chord track though. I'm going to detect chords or keys or whatever. And it looks like it found them across the bottom. And then on this track, I want to tell it to follow bass. And it is a bass guitar. Let's find out what happens. Bruh. So you can mix and match these sample packs, different sounds, different styles, different notes, everything, and fuse them together. The only thing I believe I had the problem with earlier was the fact that if this is detected, like a chord structure is detected as a minor chord, for instance, you may just want to stay in the inner circle of other minor chords instead of jumping into a major chord, because it has no way of time stretching just the third. Although with the Melodyne integration, it can technically, but it still sounds kind of crazy when you do that with Melodyne if the chord has too many keys in it. So kind of keep your chord genders the same. But anyway, I'm MGTheFuture. Hopefully that helps you guys who are using Studio One or thinking about getting it. Thank you guys for tuning into the Maschine Masters as well. If you guys have social media, you can follow me at MGTheFuture on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow at Maschine Masters as well. Until next time, guys, peace.